The blizzard raged over the jagged peaks of Glacier National Park, Montana, hammering the empty highway with fists of snow. On the lonely road's edge, a battered livestock trailer fishtailed to a stop. The engine groaned, headlights lost to the swirling whiteout, and for a moment it was only the wind howling, like a warning or a prayer. Owen Coulson gripped the wheel, his breath fogging the cracked glass. The lines in his face were drawn deep, and his hands, usually so steady, shook with something colder than the storm outside. He glanced into the rearview mirror, eyes clouded with memory and regret, then stepped out into the blizzard. The wind punched him in the chest. He staggered to the trailer, boots crunching through drifts, and yanked open the frozen latch. Inside, a horse shivered. A mare, large and proud but battered, her brown coat matted with ice and mud, one eye clouded from a wound years old. Her flanks bore cuts that told their own story, the aftermath of battles fought in places too harsh for most men, let alone beasts. Owen reached out, his fingers trembling as he unclasped her leather halter. "I'm sorry, Juniper," he whispered, voice barely audible over the shriek of the wind. "I have no choice, not anymore." Juniper, still trusting, still looking for comfort in his face, pressed her muzzle into his hand. Her breath steamed between them. For a heartbeat, Owen looked like he might collapse right there, crushed by a guilt heavier than the snow. But something snapped inside him. He turned away. Juniper limped after him, confused, until the metal door slammed shut with a finality that echoed down the empty highway. The red taillights flickered, then disappeared into the storm. Juniper was alone, battered and betrayed, the cold already biting at her bones. She stumbled into the snow, legs buckling. The world shrank to the ache in her limbs and the hammering of her heart. She collapsed, shivering violently, her branded side exposed to the wind. Around her neck, the faded military vest Owen had left behind was half frozen into her mane. The letters, once bold, "Do not abandon," were a bitter joke now, lost in the blizzard. For a moment, the world went silent except for the wind. Juniper's breath slowed, the fight draining out of her. Memories flickered, fire, stampedes, midnight rescues, Owen's steady hands, nights spent standing guard by missing children. Now she was nothing but a shadow on the ice. The storm closed in, erasing tracks, hiding her from the world. In that deep primal darkness, a single question twisted and clawed. Why? Why would Owen, her handler, her partner, her lifeline, leave her to die? And could she survive the night? But fate, cruel as it was, hadn't finished with Juniper. The wind shifted, carrying something beneath the shriek of the storm, a faint sound, almost lost in the chaos. Was it the echo of hoofbeats? A shout, desperate and distant. She lifted her head, listening. The world was still cold, still savage, but now a sliver of hope crept in with the snow, sharp, uncertain, alive. She didn't know it yet, but she was not alone. That first night was a blur of terror and cold. Juniper's body trembled, her thoughts chasing one another like startled deer. She crawled, instinct guiding her, beneath a fallen pine. The branches barely shielded her from the icy wind, but she clung to them, driven by the memory of all she'd endured. Fires, floods, gunshots, Owen's quiet praise, the heavy saddle of duty. Darkness pressed in. Juniper's legs were numb, her heart pounding in her ears. The pain of abandonment dug deeper than any physical wound. She thought she could hear Owen's voice, steady, reassuring, telling her to stand, to keep going, to never quit. But this time, he was gone. The world narrowed to the frantic shuddering of her breath and the old scar above her eye, burning in the cold. Snow piled up over her back, heavy as regret. She drifted into a dreamless place, half awake, half gone. Flashes of memory, children's laughter, wildfire smoke, Owen's hand brushing her mane, the echo of her own hooves pounding over empty fields. Hope and despair wove through her like the wind. Time lost meaning. Night blurred into morning, if morning ever came in that howling white wilderness. Juniper's world shrank to hunger and pain, each breath a struggle, each heartbeat a question. But still, somewhere deep inside, something refused to die. The wind shifted again. Juniper heard a cry, a human voice, desperate, carried by the storm. Then the sharp, unmistakable sound of another horse. frantic and wild. Was it real, or just a cruel trick of her mind? She forced herself to rise, pushing against the snow that pinned her. Her legs shook, her wounds screaming, but instinct drove her forward. She peered through the branches, eyes stinging from the wind. In the blizzard's chaos, she saw a shadow, a figure stumbling, clutching something close. Another horse, riderless, circled in panic. The human fell, blood spattering the snow, and shouted again. Juniper's heart hammered. She didn't know if this stranger meant hope or danger, but as the cold pressed in and the world threatened to fade away, she knew one thing. To live, she had to move. With a last shuddering breath, Juniper pushed herself forward, toward the unknown, toward the stranger in the storm. And with that choice, everything changed. Juniper's breath steamed in ragged clouds as she forced herself out from beneath the fallen pine. The shelter barely kept the worst of the blizzard off her back, but she was shaking uncontrollably now, snow caked in her mane, the old pain in her leg pulsing with every movement. Her world had shrunk to this: pain, cold, hunger, and that distant, desperate sound threading through the storm. She moved inch by inch, fighting the urge to simply lie down and let the snow cover her for good. Survival had once been simple: obey commands, move as told, stand firm through smoke and fire. But now, every step felt like a betrayal of that old life. She was alone, no handler, no herd, no mission left except to survive another hour. Each time her hooves broke through a crust of ice, it sent a jolt up her battered limbs. She paused, breathing hard. In her mind, images flickered. A stampede at dusk, panicked cattle thundering across open ground, the distant scream of sirens, Owen's low voice saying, "Easy, girl, I've got you." His hands had always been steady, even when the world was not. Now the only voice was the wind, shrieking with rage, blowing the past farther and farther away. The forest was a maze of white and black, snow draped over branches, icy limbs bending and creaking. Juniper's body moved on instinct, her senses blurring between memory and the razor edge of the present. She thought of the warning stitched into her vest. Do not abandon. It was a cruel joke now, a relic of a world that hadn't cared enough to keep her safe. Suddenly she heard the sound again, louder, not an echo, not a trick of her mind, but a real human shout, closer now, urgent and raw. She hesitated, ears flicking. Horses knew to avoid men in the wild, but Juniper's instincts were tangled, trained to trust, desperate for connection, terrified of pain. She waited, hidden, as the shadowy figure stumbled through the trees, collapsing not 10 yards from where she hid. The man was tall, broad-shouldered beneath his winter coat, but his face was pale, lips blue with cold. Blood stained his sides, spreading out in the snow like spilled ink. In one trembling hand, he clutched a worn leather satchel, pressing it close as if it were the only thing keeping him alive. His other hand reached out, fingers clawing at the air. "Help!" he shouted into the void, his voice cracking with panic and exhaustion. His eyes landed on Juniper, at first wild with fear, then widening in disbelief as he took in her vest, her scars, her proud, battered frame. "Horse! Hey! Please!" He coughed, voice nearly gone. "Don't run. I need help. They're coming." For a moment, Juniper froze. Her heart pounded. She didn't know this man. But something in his voice, a mix of desperation and something else, some kind of shattered dignity, reminded her of the soldiers she'd once stood beside. He dragged himself forward, leaving a dark trail in the snow. "I'm not here to hurt you. I just can't let them find me, not yet. Not with this." He held up the satchel as if she could understand its importance. "It matters. It really does." Juniper's instincts warred inside her. One side screamed to flee, another whispered to stay. She took a tentative step closer, nostrils flaring, reading the stranger's scent, blood, fear, determination. The cold pressed in, numbing her legs. She remembered what it felt like to trust, to answer a call, to be needed. The man's head sagged. "They're coming," he muttered, his breath shallow. "They'll kill me, and you too, if they find you." Something in his voice, regret perhaps, or the shadow of a command, sparked an old memory. Juniper edged closer, just enough to see his face. His eyes, dark and sunken, looked back at her with a plea that required no words. He tried to reach her, but collapsed, his blood mixing with the snow. The satchel fell from his grasp, tumbling open. Papers spilled out, maps, photographs, a glint of a flash drive dangling from a cord. Juniper nosed the man's shoulder. He was fading fast. She let out a soft, guttural nicker, more a question than a greeting. Would he respond? Was this the end of both their roads, or the beginning of something neither could see? The blizzard's wail softened for a heartbeat. In the space between their shivering bodies, something fragile took root, a connection. The man, Liam Blackwell, though Juniper didn't know his name, murmured, "You're not just a horse, are you?" She stepped closer, letting her warmth brush his frozen cheek. The snow fell heavier, piling up around them, as if to bury every secret, every wound. Still, neither moved away. Juniper sank down beside him, her strength nearly gone. She pressed her shoulder to his chest, sharing what little warmth she had left. He managed a broken laugh, then a cough, then nothing at all. The world faded to white, but Juniper's heart, for all its scars, beat steady and strong. The question lingered, unspoken but burning. Was this her end, or her second chance? Somewhere in the trees another horse whinnied, echoing the question out into the endless, snow-choked night. As darkness claimed them both, hope, ragged, stubborn, wild, refused to die. Juniper woke before dawn, the sky a solid wall of gray outside her shelter. Her body ached with 1,000 old wounds, and the cold had worked itself into her bones, but something had changed. Beside her, pressed half under the pine's bent branches, the stranger, Liam Blackwell, breathed shallowly, blood still seeping from the gash in his side. The snow had buried their tracks, muting every sound except the pulse of the wind, but here, for a moment, there was a kind of uneasy peace. She watched him as he slept, every muscle tensed, uncertain what to expect. Human sense, fear, sweat, blood, and something sharp, chemical hung around him. Horses remember pain. Juniper flinched as she remembered other men, the dark stalls, the burn of a rope, the sting of commands shouted by strangers. This man was different, but his pain was familiar. It called to something raw and ancient inside her, something older than memory. Liam stirred, his breath catching, his eyelids fluttered. When he finally blinked awake, confusion twisted his features. For a heartbeat, fear overtook him. He recoiled, pressing a hand to his wound. He looked around, disoriented, until his gaze landed on Juniper. For a moment, they simply stared at one another, each measuring the other's intent. Her ears swiveled. She stamped her hoof, just once, the universal language of warning. But she didn't move away. Instead, she watched him, alert and wary. Liam struggled upright, teeth gritted. He pulled the satchel closer, clutching it like a lifeline. "You stayed," he rasped, almost to himself. "God, you actually stayed." His fingers fumbled through the satchel, checking that nothing was missing. Papers, a thick folder marked with government stamps, a battered notebook, and a flash drive on a keyring, all accounted for. He slumped in relief, then hissed as the pain returned. He turned to Juniper, seeing the military vest for the first time. His gaze sharpened. You're one of them, aren't you? Rescue horse, military trained." His voice was raw, equal parts awe and heartbreak. He reached a tentative hand toward her neck, stopping just shy of her mane. Juniper tensed, muscles rigid, every instinct urging her to back away, but she stood her ground, breathing slow, her body vibrating with uncertainty. She could smell the old injuries on Liam, the bitterness of old betrayal. Something about him was deeply broken, something that matched the fractures in her own soul. Liam's hand hovered, trembling. I used to work with animals like you," he whispered, almost as if he were talking to the wind. "I tried to do the right thing. I tried to blow the whistle when they started throwing you away like garbage, and now look at me. Look at you." His words were slurred, the cold and blood loss stealing his strength. He let his arm drop. "I'm sorry. I don't know what they told you or what they did to you, but you don't deserve this. None of you did." Juniper tilted her head, uncertain, reading the pain in his eyes. She took a cautious step forward, close enough for her breath to warm his hand. He didn't move, didn't force it, just waited, vulnerable and honest. A moment passed, a moment heavy with meaning. A gust of wind rattled the branches, showering them both with snow. Juniper's ears flattened, but she didn't run. She lowered her head, almost nuzzling his shoulder, before pulling away, uncertain. She remembered what trust had cost her, but there was something in this man, a kind of defiance, a refusal to give up, even as he bled out in the snow, that pulled at her. Suddenly a crack echoed through the woods, distant but unmistakable, the sharp bark of a snowmobile engine. Juniper flinched, eyes wide. Liam jerked, panic flickering across his face. "No, not yet, please, not yet," he whispered. He fumbled with the satchel, pulling out a small, battered radio. Static. He pressed the button. Nothing but white noise and the rush of the storm. He sagged, defeated, looking back at Juniper. "I have evidence," he murmured, almost to himself. "I have proof of what they did to you, and to so many others. I thought I could run, get it out to the world. But I'm no good at running, not anymore." His gaze softened. "But maybe you are." He reached for her again, this time with less fear, more hope. "Can you help me, girl? Just don't leave me here, not yet." The snowmobiles were getting closer, the sound bouncing off the frozen trunks, mixing with the wind's endless howl. Juniper looked from the man to the shadowed forest, torn between the safety of flight and the fragile connection forming between them. With a deep breath, she stepped forward and nudged his hand just once with her muzzle, his eyes filled with tears, not from pain but from relief. "Thank you," he whispered, voice breaking. "You're braver than I'll ever be." In that moment, something shifted between them. Not quite trust. Trust was too costly, too easily shattered, but a fragile alliance. Two wounded souls, hunted and haunted, choosing not to abandon each other in the cold. Juniper stayed by his side as the storm raged on, her breath and body heat keeping him from freezing. The night seemed endless, but for the first time since Owen's betrayal, Juniper felt the smallest ember of hope begin to flicker. She was no longer alone. The storm would pass. The hunters would come. But for now, under the broken pine, the wounded horse and the broken man had each other, and that was enough. The storm had quieted by morning, but the world was changed. The snow lay deep, swallowing up the forest floor and blanketing every branch. There was a blue silence, soft, heavy, absolute, broken only by the occasional snap of a frozen limb and the harsh, shivering breath of two survivors huddled beneath a sheltering pine. Juniper had not slept, not really. Each time her eyes drifted shut, the old memories crashed in. Flashbacks of fire, smoke, a handler's voice, the crush of a falling barn. But now there was another sound, the weak, uneven breathing of the man beside her, Liam. His presence was as fragile as the ice clinging to her mane, but for some reason she found herself listening for it, needing him. He stirred just after dawn, wincing as he rolled onto his side. "You're still here," he whispered, as if surprised by his own luck. Juniper shifted, cautious but unmoving, her hooves half buried in the drift. She felt his gaze, searching her face for some sign of betrayal, or maybe forgiveness. Liam tried to sit up, but the pain in his side forced him to stop. He pressed a trembling hand against the wound, jaw clenched. "Stupid. Should have known better. Should have just kept quiet." His words tumbled out, edged with guilt and exhaustion. He glanced at Juniper, his eyes rimmed red with cold and fear. "You ever do something you thought was right only to watch it blow up in your face?" His voice broke on the last word. "I reported them. The guys who ran your old unit. The horses were getting hurt. Left out in storms, worked until they dropped. I couldn't take it anymore, so I told, and now I'm here, bleeding in the woods." He laughed, a hard, bitter sound, then coughed, doubling over. Juniper flicked an ear, watching his pain ripple through him. Something about his confession, raw, unfiltered, unlocked a memory, standing in a smoky field, a child clinging to her mane, Owen's voice promising, "You did good, girl." For one heartbeat, she let herself remember what trust had felt like. Liam reached for his satchel with clumsy fingers, pulling it closer. "You know, I used to be a captain. Mounted search and rescue. They said I had a future. He unzipped the bag, rummaging through its contents, as if looking for something to anchor him. Juniper moved closer, curious despite herself. He noticed, managed a crooked smile. "You ever see a grown man cry?" His eyes glistened, but he blinked the tears away. "I used to think animals couldn't understand guilt or shame. Guess I was wrong." He pulled out a roll of bandages and tried to wrap his side, hands shaking so badly he could barely keep hold of the fabric. Blood seeped through the white cotton, bright against the snow. He pressed down, hissing, then slumped back, spent. Juniper inched forward, driven by instinct more than trust. She nudged his arm with her muzzle, gentle but insistent. Liam looked at her, really looked, not just with his eyes, but with something deeper. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "For everything." He shivered violently, teeth chattering. "They'll come looking, you know. The men who want this." He gestured to his satchel. "Buried. I thought I could run, but I can't outrun the past." His voice faded, and suddenly his body sagged. The cold and the blood loss had taken their toll. His eyelids fluttered, breath slowing until he slipped into unconsciousness. Juniper watched in alarm, uncertain what to do. The old training rose inside her. Protect, comfort, endure. She lowered herself beside him, pressing her warm flank to his freezing body, sharing what little heat she had left. The snow drifted down in soft waves, muffling the world. Juniper's heartbeat slowed, but she stayed awake, watching for danger. The pine branches above creaked, heavy with ice, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote yipped, a lonely, hungry sound. Hours passed. The world shrank to the small, desperate patch beneath the tree. Liam's breathing steadied, though his face was ashen, lips cracked and blue. Juniper nosed his hand again, testing for a response. This time his fingers twitched, curling weakly around her muzzle. It was enough, a tiny gesture, a promise not to let go. In the half-light, Juniper's gaze drifted to the satchel, its flap fallen open. Inside, tangled among the folders and notes, something glinted. A flash drive on a battered lanyard, the words "Equine Disposal Protocol, Top Secret," stamped across its plastic case. She nudged it with her nose, drawn by curiosity. It swung, catching the cold light. Something about the words "disposal," "protocol," "top secret" made her uneasy. She couldn't read, but she knew danger when she saw it. This man, whatever he'd done, was hunted. And now, so was she. Still, she did not leave. As the sun fought its way through the clouds, sending shafts of pale light across the snow, Juniper stood watch over Liam. He was a stranger, broken and bleeding, chased by shadows. She was a discarded survivor, haunted by her own betrayals. But here, under a battered pine, in the aftermath of a storm, a silent alliance was born. She was no longer a tool, no longer a machine to be discarded. She was a living soul, bound, however tenuously, to another lost and hunted creature. In that fragile trust, as the forest waited, something like hope began to grow. The weak sun barely broke through the frozen clouds by mid-morning, casting a gray pallor over the woods. Under the battered pine, Juniper jerked awake, her instincts screaming before her mind could catch up. At first, she didn't know what startled her, but then the low, metallic roar echoed through the snow, vibrating up from the ground. Snowmobiles. Liam stirred with a groan, eyes wild as consciousness returned. For a moment he seemed lost between worlds. Then the sound registered, a pulse of engines, closer, growing. Panic surged across his face. "They found us," he whispered. His breath plumed white in the air, fast and shallow. Juniper's ears pricked forward. She didn't know these new men, but she'd seen their kind before. Boots stomping into the barn, voices hard and cold, the smell of fear and smoke. She nudged Liam urgently, her body language unmistakable. "Get up. Now." He tried to stand, swaying, his hands shaking. Blood had dried in a dark patch on his side, but the wound had reopened, staining his shirt anew. "We have to move," he muttered, clutching the satchel tight. "If they catch us, we're dead." Juniper shifted her weight, lowering her shoulder so he could steady himself. She felt the tension in him, the way he leaned on her, trusting her strength. For a brief, Flickering instant, she was back in another blizzard, Owen's voice guiding her through the dark, both of them carrying out a midnight rescue. But this time, she was the one doing the saving. The snowmobiles drew closer, the roar splitting the silence. Then, out of the trees, figures appeared, men in heavy coats, their faces hidden behind mirrored goggles and scarves. They fanned out, rifles slung low, searching the drifts for tracks. At their center rode a man on a black snowmobile, bulkier than the rest, with a predatory confidence in his movements. Lee Ellis. Ellis was a name that traveled ahead of its owner, rancher, mercenary, and by reputation, ruthless. He was the kind of man who saw animals as property and people as obstacles. He'd once hired out his own horses to the military, made a fortune, and then turned around and led the cleanup when the contracts ended. He was the reason horses like Juniper ended up abandoned, or worse. He barked orders, voice flat and cold. "They're close. No mistakes. Find the man. Find the horse. The vest's GPS still pings in this area." Juniper froze, heart hammering. She didn't understand the words, but she recognized the threat. Liam staggered, nearly falling, his hand fisted around the flash drive in his pocket. He looked at Juniper, desperation etched deep in his face. "I know you're scared, but you've got instincts. They're better than mine now. Can you get us out of here?" For a heartbeat, Juniper hesitated. She remembered Owen's abandonment, the sting of betrayal, but something deeper, older, rose inside her. She'd been trained to follow orders, but now, in the chaos of survival, she was the one leading. She nudged Liam, harder this time, then turned and started toward a narrow, snow-choked trail she'd once used to escape wolves. The brush was thick, barely passable, but the terrain gave her cover. Liam stumbled after her, clutching the satchel, leaving a staggered line of footprints. The snowmobiles roared in frustration, engines revving, but the men wouldn't risk the deep woods on foot. Not yet. They moved through the forest, ducking under frozen limbs, weaving between shadow and sun. Juniper's breath fogged the air, each stride fueled by a will to live she hadn't realized still burned inside her. Liam struggled to keep up, tripping over roots, gasping. He bit back curses, but he never let go of the satchel. Between breaths, he told her the truth, the story he'd been carrying like a sickness. "There are dozens of horses like you," he panted. "Rescue horses, military service, search and rescue, all declared retired and abandoned. Some sold to slaughterhouses, some just left to die. It's all in here." He tapped the satchel. "Names, dates, proof. If Ellis gets it, it all disappears." Juniper flicked an ear, sensing the urgency, the way his pain was wrapped up in hers. And this was bigger than a wounded man and a broken horse. This was about all the ones left behind. She moved faster, forcing Liam to keep up. The shouts behind them grew louder. A rifle cracked, splintering a branch overhead. Liam ducked, stumbling. Juniper pressed forward, using her size to block his fall. The path narrowed, branches scratching her flanks. She remembered the tricks Owen had taught her, how to double back, how to hide scent, how to vanish in plain sight. As the footsteps drew closer, she pushed through a stand of scrub pine and led Liam to a shallow ravine. The two tumbled down, breathless, landing in a tangle of roots and ice. The world was silent except for the pounding of their hearts. Above, Ellis's men passed by, searching for easier prey. Juniper and Liam crouched together, bodies pressed close for warmth and cover. Liam's teeth chattered, but his grip on the satchel never loosened. "You saved us," he whispered. "You did that." For a long moment they simply breathed. Juniper's sides heaved, sweat cutting tracks in her muddy coat. Liam laid his head against her neck, exhausted, grateful. The danger wasn't over. Ellis would circle back and the cold would kill them if they stayed too long. But for the first time, Juniper trusted her own instincts over anyone else's. She had chosen to keep going, to protect not just herself but the broken man beside her, and the truth he carried. As the sun dipped behind the clouds, casting long blue shadows across the snow, Juniper led the way out of the ravine. She was more than abandoned, more than broken. She was a survivor, and now, maybe, a leader. They moved deeper into the wilderness, hunters at their heels, hope flickering against the dark. Somewhere ahead there had to be shelter, maybe even salvation. And as long as she could stand, Juniper would keep moving toward it. They stumbled through the wilderness for what felt like hours, Juniper's battered body moving by force of will, Liam barely keeping pace, dragging his injured leg, breath fogging in desperate clouds. The storm's edge had passed, but the cold lingered like a living thing, biting through layers of muscle and resolve. Every step was a negotiation between giving up and pushing forward. The roar of snowmobiles faded into the distance, replaced by the quiet hush of wind through the trees and the crunch of ice underhoof. Juniper's senses strained for any sign of safety. Every shadow could have been Ellis's men. Every snap of a branch was a warning. But she pressed on, driven by an instinct that was older than training, older even than memory, the urge to find shelter, to survive. Liam stumbled behind her, the satchel clutched tight to his chest, face gray with pain. He never complained. Instead, he muttered encouragements to himself and to Juniper, his voice hoarse but steady. "Almost there, girl. Don't give up on me now, not after everything." The forest opened up ahead, a break in the trees, a trail flattened by heavy tires, and the sharp tang of exhaust lingering in the cold air. Juniper paused, nostrils flaring, ears twitching. She heard voices, muffled but unmistakable, and the rumble of an engine. Suddenly, a massive dually pickup crested the hill, headlights cutting through the morning gloom. The truck stopped, doors flew open, and a woman jumped down, tall, solid, with a fire-red braid and a weathered face that radiated authority and warmth in equal measure. Grace Linwood, her eyes took in the scene in an instant. The battered horse, the half-collapsed man, the blood, the look of desperate flight. Without hesitation, Grace called back over her shoulder, "Will, first aid kit, now, Molly, stay in the cab." Her voice snapped with the tone of command that brooked no argument. From the passenger seat, a teenage girl, Molly, small and sharp-eyed, watched with open concern. Juniper's gaze met Molly's, and for a moment something passed between them, recognition, maybe, or just the knowledge of pain. Molly unbuckled herself and slid out despite her mother's order, hurrying toward Juniper, arms out but slow, cautious. Grace rushed to Liam, assessing his wound, her hands quick and efficient. "What the hell happened to you?" she demanded, not unkindly. "You're half dead, both of you." She helped lower him to the ground, examining the bloody mess of his side. Liam tried to speak, but his words tangled. He clutched the satchel tighter, his gaze flickering to Juniper, pleading for trust. Will Linwood appeared with the medical kit, a broad, gentle man with the steady calm of someone who's seen it all before. "We'll get you fixed up, son," he said, kneeling beside Liam. He glanced at Grace, and their silent exchange carried a weight of history and partnership. Grace gave a single nod, and Will set to work, unwrapping bandages and cleaning the wound. Meanwhile, Molly approached Juniper with slow reverence, her palms open, eyes wide. "Hey there, big girl," she whispered, voice trembling between awe and sorrow. "You're safe now, I promise." Juniper flinched at the nearness of a stranger but didn't bolt. Instead, she lowered her head, letting Molly stroke the tangled mane. The touch was gentle, no pressure, no fear, just quiet understanding. Grace's attention turned to Juniper, and her gaze sharpened as she spotted the faded military vest, half frozen into the horse's coat. She moved closer, brushing away snow and grime until she could read the battered warning, "Do not abandon." Her face changed, and for a moment the tough exterior cracked. "I haven't seen one of these in years," she murmured, mostly to herself. "Not since my brother." The words caught, unfinished. Grace's brother had been military too, a firefighter who never came back from a training accident. The pain of that loss hovered in her eyes. She gently touched Juniper's neck, her hand trembling for just an instant. "You've been through hell, haven't you?" The Linwoods loaded Liam into the back seat of the truck, Molly riding beside Juniper, holding her reins loosely but confidently. The drive to the ranch was slow, the roads slick and treacherous, but the cab was filled with the low hum of worry and hope. Will kept pressure on Liam's wound while Grace called ahead for help, her tones steady and focused. When they reached the ranch, a sprawl of log cabins, barns, and white-fenced pastures surrounded by endless snow, Juniper could barely stand. Will and Grace helped Liam inside, settling him on the couch by a roaring wood stove. Will, a retired trauma nurse, cleaned and stitched the wound, his touch practiced and gentle. Grace turned her attention to Juniper, inspecting her legs, noting the frostbite, the old scars, the clouded eye. She led Juniper into the barn where fresh straw and warmth waited. "You're safe now," she said softly, brushing mud and ice from the mare's coat. "Nobody's gonna hurt you here." Molly stayed with Juniper, refusing to leave her side. She talked quietly, telling the mare about her own rescued animals, about the first time she rode a horse, about her dreams of becoming a vet. Juniper listened, ears flicking, letting the warmth and gentleness seep into her battered spirit. For the first time in days, she let herself relax, just a little. Inside, Will sat with Liam, pressing a mug of sweet tea into his hands. "You're lucky my wife found you," he said, eyes kind but probing. "Whatever trouble you brought with you, we can handle it. But you need to tell us what's going on." Liam hesitated, glancing at the satchel, then at the window where Juniper stood in the falling snow, Molly at her side. He nodded, decision settling across his face. "It's about the horses," he said quietly. "About all of them. And it's bigger than you think." Outside, Juniper watched the falling snow, her body aching but her heart just a little lighter. She didn't know what would come next, but she was no longer alone. In this strange new herd, beneath the vast Montana sky, she had found a moment of shelter, a reason to believe in hope again. Night fell over the Linwood Ranch, the kind of cold that made the windows weep with frost and the world shrink to the glow of lamplight and the steady crackle of the wood stove. Inside, warmth finally soaked into Liam's bones. He lay propped on the old couch, the heavy quilt pulled to his chin, drifting in and out of a feverish sleep. The sharpest pain in his side had dulled, replaced by a deep exhaustion, a kind of tired that seemed to come from his very soul. Grace moved through the kitchen with quiet efficiency, refilling mugs, checking wounds, her presence as steady as the snow falling outside. Will busied himself at the table with medical supplies, keeping a close eye on both the patient and the mood in the room. Molly was a fixture by the barn window where Juniper stood, visible in the golden wash of the floodlights, her head low as she ate from a bucket of warm bran mash. The Linwood's own horses watched her with curiosity, but none pressed close. Something in Juniper's presence, the battle scars, the battered vest, commanded a kind of quiet respect. When Liam woke fully, the clock over the mantel said nearly midnight. He tried to sit up, but Will was at his side in a flash. "Easy. You're still bleeding and I'd rather not see you back in the snow tonight." Liam managed a weak smile. "I need to talk to you. All of you. There's something you have to see." Grace and Molly gathered close, Will sitting across from Liam with a mug in hand. The fire flickered, shadows dancing on the log walls as Liam gathered his courage. He reached for the battered satchel, his fingers brushing the flash drive. He hesitated, looking at Grace. "You said your brother served?" She nodded, her expression clouding. "Firefighter, Army Reserve, didn't make it home. That vest. It brought a lot back." Liam nodded, understanding passing silently between them. "What happened to your brother isn't as rare as you think. What happened to Juniper isn't rare at all. The government had a program for rescue horses. The best were used for search and rescue, some even in combat, but when the contracts ran out, the horses didn't go home. They just disappeared." He opened the satchel and spread documents on the table, photographs, copies of medical records, lists of names and brands. "I was captain of a mounted search and rescue unit. When I found out what was happening, horses sold off, some to slaughter, some abandoned, I tried to blow the whistle. That's why Ellis is after me. That's why I was running." Grace's jaw tightened. Will looked away, jaw set. Molly drew closer to Juniper's stall window, listening as the wind rattled the glass. Liam handed Grace the flash drive. "Everything's on here. Documents, testimony, GPS data, proof. Enough to bring it all down, if someone's brave enough to share it." Will spoke softly. Why come here? I didn't know where else to go, Liam admitted. I heard rumors about your ranch, about how you took in strays, people and animals. I was hoping for shelter, maybe a phone call. But it's not just about survival anymore. People need to know what's been happening. It's not just Juniper. There are dozens, maybe hundreds like her, and Ellis won't stop until every last one is gone, or the truth is buried. Molly's voice was soft but clear. We should tell Carmen Torres. She did the stories about animal abuse at the rodeo last year. She got the whole town talking. She'd know what to do. Grace nodded. I have her number. We'll call her first thing. As they spoke, Juniper pressed close to the barn window, her breath fogging the glass, ears flicking. Molly slipped on her boots and hurried out, crunching through the snow to the barn. She opened the door and approached Juniper with gentle hands and a bucket of warm water. You're safe now, girl, Molly whispered, brushing the mare's side with slow, steady strokes. Juniper stood perfectly still, letting the warmth and the care soak into her bones. For the first time in years, she let herself accept the touch. No fear, just relief. Molly leaned her cheek against Juniper's neck, tears tracking down her face. I wish I could have saved them all, she murmured. But I'm glad you found us. Inside, Grace sorted through the files, her hands trembling. She found a faded photograph, Juniper as a younger horse standing beside Owen in uniform, both looking steady and proud. The brand on Juniper's side matched one listed in a folder marked Retired Assets, Unaccounted For. Grace traced the shape with her finger, realization dawning. They kept records, she said. This is how we prove what happened. They can't deny it now. Liam nodded, exhaustion weighing down his features. That's the plan. We get the story out. We make sure no more horses are lost. But we'll need help. Ellis is going to come, and he won't come quietly. Grace squeezed his hand, determination fierce in her eyes. Then let him come. This ranch stands for something. So do you. Outside, Juniper lifted her head, the first hint of peace in her gaze. In the glow of the barn, with Molly's gentle brushstrokes and the sounds of family drifting across the yard, the weight of old betrayals eased. For the first time since the storm, hope felt real, not just for herself, but for all those who'd been left behind. Inside and out, the firelight banished the dark, and the Linwoods, Liam and Juniper prepared to face whatever would come with truth, and a new, fragile sense of belonging. Midnight brought a hush to the Linwood Ranch, but it was the silence before the storm, a tension in the air, like every shadow was holding its breath. The house was lit only by the fire and a few lanterns, everyone moving quietly, nerves raw from the stories spilled in the firelight. Juniper stood in the barn, her coat finally drying, Molly curled up on a blanket beside her. The mare's breathing was steady, but her ears twitched, attuned to every distant sound. Outside, the Montana sky was black and endless. Wind scraped over the snow, rattling the barn door. Then, a sharp, metallic beep. Unnoticed until now, a tiny red light blinked on the corner of Juniper's battered military vest. In the kitchen, Grace's phone vibrated with a message. Vest signal active. Asset located. Suddenly, the power snapped off. The ranch plunged into darkness, only the fireplace and Molly's flashlight providing light. Juniper stomped anxiously, picking up a scent on the wind. She moved toward the door, body tense, and Molly pressed her cheek against the mare's neck, whispering, "It's okay. It's okay." But Molly's voice shook. Grace grabbed a flare gun and flashlight. "Will, barricades. Liam, take the files. Get ready to move." Will, calm but urgent, pulled the big kitchen table against the door and motioned Liam to the pantry, a makeshift safe room. Molly darted from the barn to the house, heart pounding, nearly slipping on the ice. That's when the snowmobiles came. 6 this time, engines snarling, headlights cutting through the trees. Ellis's men circled the property, black shapes slipping between snowbanks and fence posts. One man cut the wires on the electric fence. Another slashed the ranch's satellite dish. The siege had begun. From a distance, Lee Ellis watched through night vision goggles, barking orders into a radio. "Cut power. Watch the windows. If you see the horse or the man, bring them out, alive if you can, but don't risk the package." Juniper sensed danger pawing at the barn door. Her breath fogged the glass, muscles tight and ready. She knew these men, their sense, their movements, the way they pressed in without mercy. This was a trap she'd seen before. But this time, something inside her was different. She was not alone. She would not run. Will and Grace moved swiftly. Grace handed Molly the portable radio and whispered, "Get to the attic, call for help, don't come down no matter what." Molly nodded, wide-eyed but brave, and slipped upstairs, voice shaking as she dialed the sheriff's number. Downstairs, Will loaded an old hunting rifle and passed a flare gun to Liam, who winced as he rose, blood seeping through his shirt. "You sure you can stand?" Will asked. Liam gritted his teeth. "I'll manage. We don't have a choice." Suddenly a rock crashed through the living room window, Ellis's warning shot. "Come out with the files and the horse or we burn you out," someone shouted. The voice was flat, merciless. Grace fired a flare into the sky, an SOS that blazed red against the dark. Then she ducked low, whispering to Will, "Time to make them earn it." Will nodded, setting up makeshift barricades and dousing the porch steps with kerosene. If the men tried to rush, fire would slow them down. In the barn, Juniper paced restlessly, picking up the panic of the other horses. Her own fear buzzed under her skin, but Molly's touch grounded her. That's when Juniper noticed something, a figure moving near the window. Through the glass, she recognized a familiar limp, a scarred hand, and a broken voice from her past. It was one of Ellis's wranglers, a man who'd once held her reins with cruel hands, complicit in her betrayal. Rage flared through Juniper. Rage and memory. She slammed her hoof against the stall door, shrill and defiant. The wrangler turned, eyes wide, and for an instant his bravado crumbled. "No," he muttered, fear breaking through his mask. "Not you. Not again." In the chaos, Juniper seized her chance. She broke free of her stall, the door swinging open with a crack. She charged, nostrils flaring, muscles bunching with adrenaline. The wrangler tried to block her, but Juniper lowered her head, shouldering him aside. He fell, scrambling for his weapon, but Juniper pinned him against the wall, the fury in her gaze unmoving. The man choked out, "I just did what I was told. I didn't want to." But Juniper didn't flinch. In that moment, her actions shouted louder than any words. "You will not hurt me again." The commotion in the barn drew Ellis's attention. He barked orders, "Get the horse, forget the house," and 3 men rushed the barn. Juniper, thinking fast, slipped into a rope harness that Grace had left nearby, looping it over her own neck as she'd once done during rescues. Molly, hearing the chaos, ran to Juniper's side, realizing what the mare intended. "You want to lead them away, don't you?" she whispered, tears in her eyes. Juniper nuzzled her gently, as if to say, "Trust me." With the wranglers at her heels, Juniper charged out into the night, drawing half of Ellis's crew after her into the blizzard, away from the main house. The snow swallowed them all, headlights bobbing and curses echoing through the woods. Juniper ran, swift and sure, each stride powered by a promise to herself. Never abandoned, never betrayed, not again. Back at the ranch, the remaining attackers tried to force the door, but Will's barricades held. Grace fired another flare, the sky pulsing with hope. In the confusion, Liam slipped out with the files, crawling through a side window toward the hidden path that led to the neighbor's radio tower. A desperate move, but their only shot at exposing the truth. As the siege raged and the snow fell, Juniper's courage became the beacon, turning the tide and buying time for the truth to reach the world. The world outside was chaos, flashes of light through the storm, angry shouts carried by the wind, the relentless howl of the Montana blizzard beating against the Linwood Ranch. Inside the farmhouse, the air crackled with fear and determination. Every board, every breath felt stretched to its limit. Liam pressed himself against the cold wall in the pantry, clutching the satchel to his chest. Blood had started to soak through his hastily wrapped bandage again, the sharp ache in his side reminding him with every breath that he was running on borrowed time. Across the room, Will handed him a portable radio and whispered, "The moment you get a signal, Upload those files. Carmen's waiting. Grace, in the dark kitchen, watched the barn through a slit in the curtains, one hand holding the flare gun, the other steady on her daughter's shoulder. Molly trembled, but her eyes stayed fierce, never leaving Juniper's shape in the distant snow, her hope tethered to the battered mare running for them all. Outside, Juniper cut a wild path through the storm, the harness swinging around her neck. The wranglers followed, boots sliding on ice, cursing her name. Her breath came hard and fast, flanks stinging from the wind and the memory of old wounds. Yet there was no panic in her stride, only a burning clarity, the surety that came from surviving everything she'd already faced. She led them deeper into the whiteout, weaving through stands of pine, doubling back in places she'd learned from nights spent searching for lost children. Tonight, she was leading her own rescue. Suddenly, a shot cracked through the night. Pain lanced across her shoulder, a sharp cut, more shocking than deep. Juniper stumbled, but the memory of Molly's gentle touch, of the trust in the Linwood's eyes, gave her strength. She surged forward, hooves pounding, until she found herself face to face with the wrangler who'd once betrayed her. For a split second, the two stared at each other, past and present colliding. The man raised his hand, but Juniper charged, rage and memory blending into action. She knocked him to the ground, a cut blooming on her side, but the danger behind her. At the house, Liam staggered out the back door, clutching the satchel and radio, his jaw set in grim determination. He slipped through the snow, fighting dizziness, heart hammering. At the base of the neighbor's old radio tower, the wind nearly tore the files from his hands. With blood smearing the keypad, he punched in the emergency frequency, uploading the files, testimony, photos, everything, to Carmen's secure Dropbox. The process was slow, each minute stretched by fear that Ellis's men would find him before the upload finished. Back at the ranch, Molly huddled in a corner, blanket pulled over her head. Fear pressed in around her, every creak of the house a threat. She heard footsteps crunching in the snow, the porch boards groaning. A figure loomed in the doorway, one of Ellis's men, rifle raised. Molly's breath caught in her throat. She was frozen, terror locking her in place. Suddenly the barn door exploded open. Juniper, wild-eyed and bleeding, charged into the yard, snow spraying in all directions. She saw Molly, small, vulnerable, about to be swept away like all the others before. With a desperate whinny, Juniper thundered toward the porch, ignoring the pain in her shoulder. The intruder swung his rifle toward the sound, caught off guard by the sight of the charging mare. Juniper barreled into him, knocking him sideways. His gun fired wildly into the air, the bullet lost to the night. Juniper stood over Molly, flanks heaving, refusing to let fear dictate her actions anymore. For the first time since Owen's betrayal, Juniper chose to stay, to fight, to protect. The noise drew the rest of Ellis's crew back to the ranch house, panic setting in as police sirens echoed in the distance. Carmen had gotten the files through, and the authorities were closing in. The attackers scattered, some caught in the glare of approaching headlights, others fleeing into the woods, the blizzard swallowing their shouts. Ellis, his plan in ruins, vanished into the storm, his name destined to become a cautionary tale. Inside, Grace wrapped Molly in her arms, tears streaming down both their faces. "You're safe," Grace whispered, voice trembling with relief and pride. Will dragged Liam inside, helping him to the couch as his knees finally gave out. The sheriff's deputies rushed the property, taking statements, hauling away the remaining attackers. Juniper, wounded and spent, sank to her knees in the snow, Molly beside her, holding her head and whispering, "Thank you. Thank you." Will and Grace patched her wounds, their hands gentle, reverent. The battered vest still clung to her neck, but she was no longer defined by its faded warning. She was a survivor, and tonight, a hero. As dawn broke over the ranch, the snow glittered with hope and exhaustion. Carmen's story made headlines across the country within hours. Hero horses abandoned, now honored. Linwood Ranch stands up against corruption. Calls flooded in, not just for justice, but for change. People demanding protections for working animals, reforms for rescue programs, investigations into every name on Liam's list. But the greatest change was quieter, unfolding in the kitchen as the Linwoods sat together, battered but unbroken. Liam, his voice thick with gratitude and pain, looked at Juniper and Molly and said, "Sacrifice isn't just for people. That mare, She chose us when she could have run. That's what loyalty looks like. That's what healing looks like. Will nodded. Healing comes through connection. It's not fast and it's not easy. But we choose it. Every day. Juniper's scars would never vanish, but her spirit had changed. She had found a herd that chose her, scars and all. And in choosing them, she saved them, and herself. The Montana sun rose slow and bright, painting the Linwood Ranch in gold and ice blue. The storm had passed, leaving behind a battered landscape, trampled snow and broken branches. But the house still stood, smoke curling from its chimney, and the barn glowed warm in the morning light. It was a battered sanctuary, a monument to resilience and hope. Juniper stood in the paddock, her body marked by the night's battle, fresh stitches on her shoulder, old scars silvering her hide. Will moved quietly among the animals, checking bandages and murmuring reassurance. He knelt by Juniper, hands gentle as he checked her wounds. "You're tough, girl," he said softly, pressing his forehead to hers. "You saved us all." She lowered her head, breathing in the familiar scent of hay, wood smoke, and kindness. For the first time in years, her body truly relaxed. Inside the house, Molly refused to leave Juniper's side for long. She bundled in her coat and boots, slipping out every hour to check on the mare, bringing her treats and reading aloud from an old book of horse stories. Molly's voice drifted over the snow, soft and steady, and Juniper would turn her head, ears pricked, soaking in every word. Sometimes Molly would simply sit in silence, resting her cheek against Juniper's neck, her small hands stroking the battered coat with the gentlest touch. Liam took longer to heal. His wound, though stitched, ached with every movement. But the weight on his soul, guilt, fear, the memory of running, slowly lifted as he watched the ranch fill with life again. He sat with Will and Grace at the kitchen table, poring over emails and voicemails that poured in after Carmen Torres's story broke. Local reporters called, national news crews arrived. There were interviews, photos, and questions, but most important, there was hope. Carmen's article swept across the country, and with it a wave of outrage and action. "Hero Horses Abandoned, Now Honored" was more than a headline. It became a rallying cry. Animal rights groups demanded investigations. Lawmakers called for hearings. The military's old protocols were torn apart, and new legislation, Juniper's Law, was drafted to protect every working animal from neglect and abandonment. Rescue organizations from all over reached out to the Linwoods. Some brought horses with stories etched in their bodies. Others brought supplies, or just the willingness to help repair what had been broken. The ranch, once a quiet refuge, became a beacon. People came to learn, to listen, to promise that no animal would be discarded again. Juniper watched it all with calm, steady eyes, the herd around her slowly growing. For Juniper, the greatest change was not in the headlines, but in the small moments. Molly sneaking apples from the kitchen, Will singing old country songs while he mucked the stalls, Grace, who spent her evenings brushing Juniper's tangled mane by lantern light, humming softly. Each touch, each word, slowly rebuilt what had been broken by abandonment. One afternoon, Molly came to the paddock with a leather halter, brand new, the brass nameplate polished and gleaming. She slipped it over Juniper's head, fastening it with careful hands. "You're family now," she whispered. "You always were. We just had to find you." Under the open sky, Juniper grazed with the herd. No longer the outcast, no longer the tool or asset or burden. The other horses accepted her in their quiet, wordless way. Even the youngest filly followed at her heels, looking to her for guidance. Juniper's body was still marked by every hardship she'd endured, but her eyes were clear, her coat beginning to shine again. She belonged. Liam, standing at the fence one evening, watched Molly and Juniper together. He turned to Grace and Will, voice rough with gratitude. "I used to think survival was about fighting," he admitted. "But it's about connection, about finding the people and animals who see you for who you are, scars and all." Grace nodded, her arm slipping around Will's waist. "We heal together. That's the only way." The seasons turned. Spring thawed the snow. Wildflowers broke through the earth, and new life flickered everywhere. The ranch fence, once broken, was mended with help from neighbors and strangers alike. Juniper galloped in the wide pasture, Molly's laughter trailing behind her. Each day brought a little more healing, a little more trust. In-depth analysis, life lessons. True worth isn't what you do, it's that you are seen and loved. Juniper, once thrown away, now stood at the heart of a family who cherished her not for what she could do, but for who she was. Healing is slow, and it never erases scars, but kindness and courage can build something new. The Linwoods, Juniper and Liam learned that together. Every meal shared, every story told, every risk taken for another. The herd you choose can save your life and your heart. Juniper's story was not only about survival, but about choosing to trust again, about finding a place where broken things are welcomed and made whole. As the sun set over Glacier National Park, Juniper grazed while Molly read at her side. The golden light wrapped around them both. Juniper's ears flicked toward the horizon, not in fear, but in curiosity, in hope. She had found her herd, her family, and her place in the world. And as Grace said to the crowd the first time visitors gathered at the fence, "May we always stand by those discarded or betrayed, human or animal, and give them a second chance." Juniper's fight was for dignity, not just survival. Who will you welcome into your herd?